Hey everyone, welcome back to the Leverage Life Show. I am Cord Offenbacker, and this is my brother Kyler Offenbacker, co-host of the Leverage Life Show, where we aim to throw a dart right in the bullseye, what it looks like to leverage every opportunity life throws at you. We like to record, both at the same time in the same, room. But fun fact for you, Kyler and I actually have our second babies due literally at any moment, and they're actually
Yeah.
due within 1 day of each other. So
Yeah, didn't plan that at all either, it just happened to be that way.
no, we called each other, back last June and said, "Well, you want to have a baby right at the same time."
My gosh. Yeah, both having girls too, so
It's
we're
gonna be
2.
crazy. Gonna be crazy.
Yep.
Anyways, so thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you with us. Today, talking about final expense. And yes, we're celebrating Kyler and I new life in our journeys and second babies, but also something that gets talked about a ton is end of life. And really that's the beginning of life, end of life today. Final expense insurance, what it is, why it matters, all the ins and outs of it. And we hope to bring you some value in that because funerals are expensive. Kyler, how much is the average funeral?
Average funeral in the US is around $12,000.
12,000 kind of at a minimum, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah, it's gonna be on a spectrum, of course, but yeah, the average is around 11 to
I
12,000.
mean, everyone wants the nicest casket, of course. You got to go all out, there at the end.
Yeah, trying to go for a solid
of,
walnut
of
casket, that'll
course,
be
handmade
insane.
and everything.
Oh my gosh, hand carved.
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, we want to honor, parents and grandparents and those that are passing. And there's really nothing worse than grieving losing a loved one while trying to figure out how to pay for it at the exact same time. I can't think of anything harder than that, than, having to plan out an entire service without having anything in place to that planned out the actual cost of that service or the graveside or the cost of a casket. And yeah, it's hard to talk about, but we kind of just assume someone's going to figure it out. Everyone has a planner in their family. Everyone has an administrator, that type of person, but it's not that easy. Someone always ends up paying for the costs, and it's usually and unexpectedly the kids and the children. That's why we need to break down final expense insurance today, what it is, what it looks like, who it's for, and why it is most often the most loving financial decision someone can make so that they can carry on their legacy when they die.
Absolutely. And Cord, final expense insurance, it's probably not on a lot of younger
Mhm.
people's top of mind. When people get into their 60s, their 70s, these are things that people think about. And it's just because that's a lot of times they're getting to the age that maybe that they saw their parents pass away at, whether it was like 75 or 80. And I know that there's historical averages on when people do pass, male and female, but these things are really big top of mind when people get to certain ages. And so, if you really break down what final expense insurance is, it's basically a small permanent life insurance policy, and it's designed to cover funeral costs, to cover burial or cremation, whichever you choose, of course. It could go to cover some medical bills, maybe minor debts. It really depends on how much you're wanting to use for the funeral, and we actually do have several different tools that
Mhm.
we can do for final expense or to funeral costs, essentially, to give people an estimate of how much their funeral is going to cost. And we even go back to so far to say, like, hey, after a loved one dies, like, you still have to have the mortgage. You got to we've talked about these things in other episodes, but it's important to realize that you may want to have a little bit more than just to pay for the funeral. And so coverage amounts will typically range from anywhere from five to $50,000. It depends on the situation of what everyone is going through, and really just what they want to do with their loved one. But it's a permanent policy. Like I said, the premiums are fixed. Coverage lasts for life, immediately paid out upon death. It kind of depends on which type of policy you have, and there that kind of goes into the different types of final expense cord. And so there's different policies like their level policies, there's greater modified, there's guaranteed issue. All of them are just a little bit different. We like to look for the ones, if you can qualify for it, that is going to be, of course, the lowest cost, but it's going to be paid out full upon death. Now, if you can't maybe pass underwriting, then sometimes we've got to look into some more creative options. And so that's sometimes what we have to do for people, just so they can have something in place. And sometimes what that looks like is if they die within a certain amount of period of time, that they would get the family would get the return of premiums back. And so, you've paid in so much, you're not going to get the full death benefit, but you're going to get a little bit back return of premiums, or that, and maybe on top of that, it may be a certain percentage as well. And so there's a few different things that are involved. But ideally, we look for policies that are going to be for immediate upon death. Then the family's gonna get the payout for that, and they can use that to
And I
pay
heard you
for
say
the
that, it
funeral.
ranges from 5,000 to 50,000. Could you share just real briefly how we're actually calculating what coverage is needed? Yes, average funeral is about that 12 to 15,000 range, but you said they might need to cover the mortgage for a couple of extra
Mhm.
months while they get the house ready to sell potentially. What all goes in? What factors are there? And how do you go about calculating how much coverage is actually necessary within that?
Yeah, for sure. And so it kind of goes back to, like I said, we use a calculator as well. And you can find some different calculators online. We use one that's through Legacy Safeguard, and so what we can specifically do is say, hey, we know your funeral is going to cost on average $11,000 to $12,000. Okay, we know that's going to be normally what it is. You have to look at, say, hey, how much is it going to cost
Mhm.
for flowers? How much is it going to cost for your book, for people to write in, hey, we attended this thing? So there's some like stationary things involved. Of course, there's going to be some differences involved with between like a casket or some like if you're going to actually just be cremated. There's different costs associated with that. We look at, if they want to be able to pay for the mortgage, like you mentioned, or if we want to fly in Aunt Sue
Of course.
from Virginia, right? Those are things that people like. They're really close relatives, but they're far away. It's going to be a big thing for them to come into town for your funeral, and but they would want them to be there to celebrate their life, right? So those are things you can factor in if you want to have X amount of dollars to maybe fly people in, put them up in a hotel. Another big one that people don't think about is possibly catering. If you're celebrating someone's life, then
That's right.
people still have to eat and you're going to have lots of people, and so you want to be able to sit down and just be able to have that fellowship with your family. And so there's things that people don't think about a lot of times, but when we got to look line by line in a calculator, we can just add these things up and we can go like, hey, how much do you want to have for flowers? How much do you want to have for this and this? And at the end of it, it's going to give us a total amount. And a lot of times it's going to be actually a lot higher than people think it's actually going to cost to actually bury a loved one. And so when we do that, of course, what we're always going to do is we're going to print that out. We can give that to the family members so they can talk about it. They can really just dive through this stuff to make sure it's what they want to do. And at the end of the day, we're going
Yeah.
to be able to
That's
support
gonna
them in
spark some
whatever
really
decision that may
healthy and
be.
good conversations for our family as well, so that we can pass on a legacy and
Absolutely.
remember our loved ones in the way that's honoring to them. And that's all really helpful, Kyler. Give me some ideas on why this really matters for that. You said 65 to 70 range, you really start to think about this and those final expenses. So talk more about, okay, so what's going through their head? Why does this matter at this stage and at this time?
If you're serious about making smart decisions with your money and protecting the people who matter most, this is where clarity starts. The reality is, most people don't lack options, they lack clear strategy that actually fits their life. At the Leverage Life Show, we help individuals and families understand what makes sense for your situation, whether that's life insurance, final expense planning, or more advanced strategies like bank premium financing. If you want to take the next step with confidence, text SHOW to 479-396-3528. We'll help you get clear before you make a decision. Now let's get back to the show. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like what I mentioned earlier. I mean, when people are getting in their 60s and possibly 70s, they saw a family member, or they saw a loved one, or maybe their parents, they might have died at a certain age. And so these are things that are top of mind, but a lot people have families and people want to be able to leave a lasting legacy. They want to make sure that their family is not
Mm.
burdened by their funeral costs. And that's one thing that I will ask people, like, it's about you. You're not here anymore, but these are your costs. And so, what kind of person do you want to be in order to leave that lasting legacy for your family? And a lot of times, what I like to ask people is, I'll have people literally write down, what character traits do you want to embody your family? Some people will say loving, provider, guidance. Like, they want to be that kind of person. And so we talk about, okay, if you want to be that person, we talk about one of the hardest times in your family's life because you've passed. This is one last opportunity to be all of those things for your family. And it really hits home in a lot of ways because we always want to be able to identify with the type of person that we look up to, or we had a mentor, they had, certain character. We wanted to embody that. And so when you get into these later years of life, 65, 70, you're really thinking about these things of how do we pass on the values and the character traits and the morals that we have, that I have, and I want to pass these on to my family as well. And so this is just the perfect opportunity to be able
And
to do
here's
that in a
something
loving
people
way
miss. I
for your
also want to make
family.
a quick note. You had mentioned that legacy safeguard tool that we like to use. We can even go in there and craft an ideal service
Mhm.
in that as well that will immediately go to your family, what songs you want to play, if there's scriptures that you want read or words that you want read, or even access to information like, hey, does your family know your bank account password and username so they're not having to, reset password? That's helpful. We need to
Yeah.
pass those on, and if we get that set up for you, it's super helpful because it immediately goes to your family and they have access to everything. And that's something people don't think about, even all the way down to,
Mhm.
passwords and usernames. And when you die without any preparations in place, yes, the family is grieving, but they're not just grieving. Your kids are trying to scramble to get everything figured out, and sometimes that final expense, it's not really about the huge wealth building. It's not about the millions. If you have that, great. Sometimes it's more about just protecting those relationships during that really fragile moment. And you spent your whole life taking care of your family and providing for your family,
Mhm.
so this is an opportunity to do it, one last time. So, Kyle, I want to give you a couple examples here, real life examples, one
Exactly.
who did have preparations in place and one who didn't. So, excuse me for being a little bit forthright here, but we're going to do the one who didn't have any preparations in place, and we're calling that story the burden. Now I know that's forthright, but just listen and hear it out. So this individual's name, we'll redact, but we'll call him Robert. So Robert passed away at 74 years old, and he had no insurance in place, no final expense insurance, and minimal savings. It didn't mean he didn't work hard. He did work hard, but towards the end of your life, sometimes you dwindle down those savings. The average American sometimes just doesn't have these things in place ahead of time. He has a daughter. She had to put $9,000 for a very low cost minimum funeral for him, and she had to put it on a credit card to cover those final expenses. And it took over 2 years for her to pay that off because, like most people, she didn't just have 9,000 liquid ready to stroke a check for. That wasn't what that money was ready to be used for. So she had to figure out and scramble and put other preparations in place. And it took a while to pay that off, over 2 years. And now, anytime that the memories of the service, and as that, credit card statement and fees are getting paid off every single month, that legacy of Robert, it almost has a cloud on it, and we don't want that cloud to be on it. We don't want the scrambling to happen. We want
Mm.
a gift to be passed on instead. Which brings up to that second example, a second story of Margaret. She retired as a teacher, and she spent her whole career educating and pouring into kids. She ended up buying a $15,000 final expense policy at the age of 67. She'd just gotten on Medicare a couple of years before that. She just determined, okay, I need a final expense policy. Let's do 15,000 after calculating everything. She passed away at 81 years old. And here's exactly how it got broken down. $10,000 covered all the funeral expenses and graveside expenses, and it included a small meal catered at the service, after the service. $3,000 had to go to cover some leftover medical bills and some small medical bills that needed to be taken care of. But here's what got really fun. $2,000, because it was a $15,000 policy, went directly into her children's pocket. It's like a little nudge and blessing and extra gift. And her children said they can walk away from the service and say, you know what? Mom always handled everything. I mean, that's legacy. That is like passing on a gift to your family instead of passing on like that. Oh, we're trying to scramble. We're figuring out the burden, of trying to put everything together and how are we going to pay for all of this.
Yeah, yeah, those
Hmm.
are 2, good stories. I mean, these are real. We've talked about different things in the past, but I mean, anytime that we're talking about stories and stuff, like these are real life scenarios, and people will live through one of those situations in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of ways you just have to look at and be like, what is my story? How does my story want to end for my life? But then how does the story continue on for the people that are still here and grieving? So, well, Cord, let's wrap this up a little bit. And I would say at any time we do these shows, we always want to just give something to think about. So, like, if you're 65 years old, I want you to ask yourself, would my death create financial stress this week? If I was to pass this week, would my death create financial stress? How would my children pay for my medical bills or funeral expenses? And the last one that is really, really important because it really gets down to the root of the heart of all of this is how do I want to be remembered? How do I want to be remembered? And if your answer to that is to be a provider, to be loving, to be caring, to have the type of leadership in your family to be able to pass on the legacy that reduce the stress and the financial burden within the most difficult part of my family's life probably because I passed. Like if you want to assign yourself to those types of character traits, then I would really strongly suggest possibly exploring some sort of final expense policy to make sure that the burden can be taken off of your family. And sometimes passing on a legacy isn't always millions. Sometimes it's simply a small step of provision one last time.
This blessing of getting a final expense policy, a final expense insurance that life is throwing at you so that you can take care of those closest relationships one more time. This is all we got today from the Leverage Life Show. If you found any value in this episode, why don't you give this message or give this podcast and show a like or subscribe to our channel? And we hope to see you soon in future episodes.